All right. Well, welcome everybody to our community of practice. Today is going to be a discussion day for all of us. We're going to reflect a bit on the assignment and the activity we did last week. And let's start today with some announcements. Jesse, you want to do the announcements?
Sure. So the first announcement is that we have a couple scheduling considerations. The first one is that we know everybody's teaching schedule is going to change in the spring. And so we'll need feedback about if these Tuesday at noon times will continue to work for people or if we're going to adjust. My feel at this point is that we're probably going to be putting out some sort of, Calendly scheduling thing to see who is able to when. We're probably going to change the time, I guess is what I'm saying. The second announcement is that I have taken a new job, which some of you might have seen, and we are moving to Utah in January. And you'll see from our schedule that we're scheduled to start really digging into the framework for information literacy during that time. And so we'll need to figure out how to accommodate that. So we're still looking for your survey responses. That's what the survey is all about. That's in this week's module, is how to keep moving forward together.
Jesse, what's the position?
It's an instructional design position for a company called Construct.
Wow.
And they do instructional design services for Instructure clients. So that would be like Canvas clients.
Oh, cool.
Very cool. Congratulations.
Yeah, I'm excited.
I'm excited and sad.
A little
Bet you're
terrified.
sad. Yeah.
So there's a link. I posted a link to the survey in our chats. I don't know if you can see it or not, but if you want to copy and paste the link to the survey, it's there. So
Otherwise, it is in the module. Yeah. Yeah. Any questions? Any other questions moving forward?
I filled out the survey, but and I marked that I want to do a research project, but I am completely willing to not do one because my schedule keeps changing. So I don't know what classes I will be teaching, and I've already I have to do another research project with one of my students, so I'm willing to take that off of the table. I still would love to participate.
Yeah.
Keep in mind and how to do this in the future,
Right.
particularly for next fall, since that's where I started thinking about this.
Yeah.
But for the spring, I think if that makes things easier for everybody, I think that's probably the way to go.
Well, it's totally up to you. The research project isn't going to be any harder for us to support, but you have the best idea of how you want to proceed, and you could even, get it down to conceptualizing it and even submitting IRB. And then if it's just too much, you just don't finish it. So it's totally up to you how far through that you want to go, or if you just want to take it off your plate and free up that mental space. That's fine.
Okay.
But yeah, we can support you either way. That's not a difficulty. It's a pleasure.
Kind of in a similar concern that I have. So I was all gearing up to do a project in a certain class a class that I'm teaching right now, but they're teaching it off sequence in the spring, but only two.
Sorry for laughing.
Yeah, but only because it's off sequence, only 2 students have signed up for it so far, so it looks like they're not actually going to have that class. So that means that I won't actually have a class to do a research project in the spring. So I might not be able to do a project. I don't know what classes I'm going to have to replace that one that I'm teaching. The other classes that I'm teaching don't really lend themselves to this type of, at least not in the way that I've thought about it to this point.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm changing gears as well, trying to see if and when research is in this vein is going to happen.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
I think every step you take towards clarifying a goal will give you the tools you need to apply what you're learning pretty much anytime in the future. So it's no worries if we don't follow through with these types of projects.
It'll be good.
Okay.
I plan on doing a research project in the spring that integrates RSD and the Framework for Information Literacy.
Mhm.
So worst case scenario, I can post what I find and you guys can use it for fodder to pick apart. And I won't, and you won't hurt my feelings, and there'll be plenty of flaws.
There we go. Yep. Yeah, and I will not be doing a project either for similar reasons.
I still, I think, want to do a project. I definitely want to concentrate on the RSD, but I haven't really thought too much further. And I was kind of looking through some of your supports, but I wasn't noticing if there's a website that already collects a whole bunch of RSD focused research or not. So that's one thing I'm kind of interested in knowing about.
Okay, Sylvia, do you know if John Willison's website
Yep.
has applied projects?
I don't know. I don't know specifically about applied projects, but John Willison's website, if you take a look at, type in RSD Adelaide, Australia, and we can, I think we've got links posted as well.
Okay.
If you take a look, I'd have to go take a look homepage, and then I think there's a research tab. He has listed a whole number of research areas by content, and then under there is a whole list of research projects, and he posts more and more all the time. So it's a really good resource. That's where, if I'm going to start, that's where I start.
Okay.
So
Great.
Is this one, Sylvia, that has a lot of
there's
examples in it? This sample?
yeah, there's that one. If you scroll down toward the end, I think there's
It's still loading.
otherwise just his plain website has one page devoted to research and what they've done.
Let's take a look.
Okay, so there we go. So take a look then at, I think it's under the evidence of effectiveness.
Okay.
I want to say it. And then
Oh,
papers drawing on the RSD, as well as empirical studies of RSD and
Mhm.
any of those. Jesse, can you click on that one and on the one that you have highlighted, papers drawing on the RSD?
Yep.
Yeah, see there's tons. And if you take a look, there's another one where they're organized by content areas.
Yep. So this website is the website that kind of has all the original stuff from John Willison, and there's a lot in here if you want to explore it.
okay.
Yeah.
And then, Jesse, off the top of your head, you don't have something, I'm thinking like library and information technology abstracts, right? Like the librarian portal. So I kind of have to sift through some of this and just do, okay.
Yep. If you want to do RSD focused to this point, I really haven't seen. All right, Sylvia, I'm going to draw on your memory again. Lynn Torres.
Yeah.
Where is she?
I think she's at Monash University.
So if you want the only librarian perspective on the RSD that I can find, aside from what we've been doing here at Stout, it would be Monash University.
Okay.
Torres, and she's typically willing to chat over email if you wanted to get in touch with her.
Okay.
And I met her last year. She's a really knowledgeable person. She's really willing to talk. So
Yeah, and I believe there's some website stuff out there.
Monash has a website as well on the framework, more from a librarian's perspective.
Yeah.
But I think too, if you're going, that probably some of the resources will be on this RSD page as well. John Willison and Lynn have worked together, interacted a lot. So the RSD framework community is pretty small and pretty well connected.
Yeah. Hopefully that helps.
Thanks.
Alrighty.
Okay. Should we get started with our activity for the day?
Yep.
Okay. So the activity was to choose an assignment or a learning activity that you already use or you're thinking about using. And instead of just looking at the facets of research, now you're widening it out to try to map also the levels of autonomy that you're asking your students to operate at, and maybe the levels of autonomy that you're implicitly expecting without actually explicitly asking of them. So there was several examples. Well, one example that Sylvia expounded upon really nicely. And then I'm not sure who is up for sharing how you mapped and what you learned. Anybody want to go first?
So I can share what I mapped out.
Dustin was the only one who posted in the forum so far.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I guess that makes me the volunteer. Okay, so I mapped so in the class that I'm teaching right now, it's a physics laboratory class. So all of our learning activities end up looking the same after a while. It's just rotating through the different labs. And so that made it pretty easy to choose one, and I just generalized for all of these. And this is kind of bringing out some of the frustrations that I'm having with this class right now. It's very much mapping into prescribed research in the assignment, and everything except for communicate and apply. And the communicate and apply is a little bit, so pushes into bounded research a little bit, because I focused a lot on, instead of just writing traditional lab reports, writing different types of writing to different audiences. And so they're having to adapt a little bit to writing to a lay audience or an expert audience, or to a less formal or more formal writing setting, and having to adapt in that way. And then when I mapped out my assessment of it, I found that yeah, I'm missing the mark in a couple areas. So specifically, evaluate and reflect. I am expecting the students to recognize if their data looks bad. So if they take a measurement and the equipment isn't working for whatever reason, I'm expecting them to be able to question and see, does this data make sense? Is this what I'm expecting the data to look like? But I haven't really told them that that's part of what they're doing or trained them how to do that. I'm kind of just expecting that to be an inherent ability. And then at the same time, in the analyze and synthesize, I noticed a gap that without really telling them how to do it or giving them guidance on how to do it, I'm expecting them to make connections between physics principles that they're learning in other classes and the experiments that they're doing in my class, which needs to be a little bit more structured if they're going to have success doing that.
Sure. How would you feel about bringing up the document that showed your process and talking us through your process a little bit?
I can try to do that. Let's see if I can.
Otherwise, I can grab it from the forum.
I'm seeing if I can find the share screen button.
Okay. If you hover at is it the top or the bottom for you, Sylvia?
It depends on where you've drug your toolbar. It's on the bottom for me, but it might be on the top if you drag your mouse towards the bottom of the screen.
And it says I'm not allowed to share while.
Oh, yep. I'll stop the share. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah, the process of mapping is very personal because we're obviously analyzing as we go and chewing on it as we go. And I think it's many times helpful to see frameworks for how people think through it.
So this is what I mapped out for the for the assignment. So what I'm asking them to do, and I kind of wrote little notes to myself more than anything else of which part of the assignment is fitting into these categories. So in Embark and Clarify, they said, basically I say, here's the experiment and hand them the lab manual. And that's the extent of all the questions that they ask. And the lab manual will tell them how to get the data, tell them what graphs to make, and tell them what questions to answer. And so it's all very prescribed from the beginning to the end. Some of the labs even have a right answer that does give them a little bit of freedom to evaluate and reflect. So if they're measuring the speed of light, for example, they know what the speed of light is, and so they can see if they're close. And then I explained what I was doing with the different writing assignments, which is the only thing that pokes out of prescribed research. And then if I go to my evaluation of it, I didn't even find anywhere where I was assessing Embark and Clarify in any assessment at all. So I even gave myself
commonly overlooked.
Yeah. So I even gave that a 0 instead of a 1, which then produced another gap. Which as I'm rethinking this class, I would like to have Embark and Clarify even be pushed over into a 2, but the assessment right now is at a 0, so there's a huge gap there that needs to be fixed. And then the other gaps come, as I was saying, in evaluate and reflect. Over here with students, I'm expecting students to recognize bad data and not really telling them how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then in analyze and synthesize, asking them to make gaps that I haven't really given them any structure and how to do that, or told them that I'm expecting them to do that. Just kind of saying, here, write about what that data means, and not really guiding them to the fact that means that you should be connecting it to other physics concepts.
Okay. Awesome.
I have a question, Dustin. You're talking about embarking and clarifying. And so the question, I've got a couple questions. One is, if you are handing them the problem, like, here's what you're going to do, take a look in the lab manual, why did you give it a 0 and not a 1? I mean, if it's prescribed and you're prescribing, so why does that not count?
Because I didn't see myself assessing it in any way. So in the assignment itself, it's definitely a 1.
Okay.
But in my assessment of it, I don't assess what questions they're asking along the way, or there's not really anything in Embark and Clarify that is being assessed. It's just, did you take the data that the lab manual asked you to? Did you produce the graphs that the lab manual asked you to? Those sorts of things.
So as you move forward, my next question becomes, where do you want to put your energy? Is it important, or is there something missing about the Embark and Clarify? Or, like, when I did the Hiking Wisconsin activity, I've never assessed whether, I've asked my students where Embark and Clarify was, because I wanted them to make the connection between the Pentagon, but I never actually assessed their ability to embark and clarify because I gave it to them. And so my question is, do you want to, are you sure you want to spend time assessing embark and clarify, or are you comfortable with where that is? Because you don't always have to assess every part of the RSD. If you only want to concentrate on improving 1 or 2 facets, then you just look at 1 or 2 facets and not the whole framework.
So where I would like to be is maybe not at the beginning of the semester, but by the end of the semester, I want these students to be able to come up with their own research questions. Maybe not come up with something completely out of the blue, but if there's, so I kind of liked Aridy's thing idea. Like, if they're handed a thing, I want them to be able to take that thing and ask questions about it. So maybe it's going to be something like, I don't know, here's a light bulb, figure out how it works. what's going on with that, or I don't know.
So
This is where I'm struggling the most right now, coming up with ideas of how to give them kind of a safe space where they can ask questions without floundering too much. I can't expect them to come up with some, completely original research. And if they're just asking whatever questions they have, we might not have the equipment for that. So it's kind of finding that middle ground where we have the equipment, but I'm giving them freedom to do what they want with the equipment.
So what I'm hearing you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that what you would really like to do is take the Embark and Clarify tile and move students from a 1 to a 2 or 3 and scaffold their learning over several weeks or months so that they can move from a 1 where you give them everything to a 2 or 3 where they can start to determine that.
Exactly.
So then the idea is what scaffolds do you put in place to do that, or how do you do that?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Dustin, I have a couple ideas for you.
Okay.
So you said you want them, by the end, you want them to be able to ask questions. And if I remember correctly, Arity, you start them at the beginning of the semester and they have to come up with 10 questions. And then maybe a month later, when they're more entrenched in thinking differently, you ask them to come up with 10 more questions. And then a month later, they come up with 10 more questions. And instead of so that gets them into that iterative question asking, like their questions have to get more specific or even in some ways more creative, like more off the mark, but it's at least a perspective that they're taking. But as far as like in the end, do they really need to come up with a question that they could test with the equipment you have? Or would it suffice for them to come up with a question and then research what equipment or tools would be needed to answer that question?
That's a good idea.
And then write the protocol. So research how to use that equipment and write the protocol. So they don't actually have to do the experiment, but they have to outline, I've chosen these tools, and this is how the step-by-step process it would be to use that tool to help me answer my question.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So make the final project a funding proposal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that could work really well.
Okay.
I think you could actually do something that's a combination of the two, so something more detailed in a write-up like Jesse was talking about, but you could also do something where a component of it is something that they could test based on the equipment that you've used. And I think for those sorts of questions, you're probably going to get things like, well, how much does it weigh? Okay, I can go get a scale and we can figure that out. Or does it conduct electricity? Well, okay, we can check that with a DMM. But I think that there's value in both of those things because they're coming up with the question and finding the answer, or they're coming up with the question and figuring out how they could answer it if they had the tools.
Yeah.
Now I'm fascinated. I never took physics. I hopped out after chemistry.
Well,
Dustin, what's your
answer to everything?
Dustin, what's your course number? We'll all sign up and then you can do research.
Well, that's the thing. Like I'm just finding out that it's not offered next semester, so I have to keep all these ideas until fall.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a question. You talked about two different things, like Embark and Clarify was one area, and then I think was it Analyze and Synthesize was another area that you
Sorry?
said there was a mismatch?
Oh, the mismaps I found in Evaluate and Reflect and Analyze and Synthesize.
Okay.
And I think that's just mostly my expectations aren't matching what I'm actually asking the students to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what you're teaching next semester, but one of the things, which, I'm sorry, what?
Neither do I. So.
But so one of the things might be, can you, even if you don't want to do it formally, can you pick one of the facets and just play around with using a strategy. So let's just assume that analyze and synthesize is do they analyze and synthesize in the other courses? I don't know, but can you take a look at playing around with different techniques and seeing what works or what doesn't? So just playing with a facet or so and just informally using your students to test your ideas about what might work and what might not.
Yeah, I'll have to give some thinking to that. I mean, yeah, I don't know. This whole process will look very different in a traditional classroom physics class than it does in a laboratory class, and so it'll take a big paradigm shift on my part to just think about what does analyze and synthesize mean in that other setting.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I would encourage you, even if any of you don't do a whole project, if you can just find like one facet to play with, and I wouldn't pick the whole framework. There was one semester, every assignment I tried a different strategy for, I think it was evaluating and reflecting. I forget which one it was, but I picked one, and on this assignment I tried this, and on this assignment I tried that. Some worked better than others, but it was interesting to see what the students came up with or how they reacted to it. So
I think, I've heard over and over us keep kind of honing in on that question asking, the ability to ask questions and tolerate ambiguity. And I imagine that as a skill could be played around with in almost any setting.
one of the things that I played around with, I think 2 years ago, that was really helpful for me, and there's different strategies out there, were things that help make students' thinking visible, because I can't correct what I can't see. So one thing that I really latched onto, there's a gentleman named Tom Wojak, who has a TED Talk out there and a website that talks about, he uses sticky notes. I forget what the TED Talk is, visible thinking, how to make toast, that's what it is.
No, it's got a wicked problem. First, tell me how to make toast.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I took that idea and I've adapted it. I didn't use, I pulled out parts of it, and it was actually really helpful. So I use the sticky, like, think about this, reflect on this, take a minute or two to write down your ideas on Post-it notes, post them to a wall, let's discuss it. So I modified it, but there was that strategy, and I actually used that a lot. There was a couple other ones I tried, but the idea was I couldn't help students embark and clarify, or I couldn't help, whichever facet you wanted to use, I couldn't really help them think about it if I couldn't understand how they were thinking about it. So I started experimenting with strategies to make students' thinking visible, and I've really found that very helpful. Is I can correct their thinking if I can see or hear what they know, but if I don't know that, I'm just making assumptions. So another exercise I tried was at the beginning of class, I had them draw research. So tell me what research looks like, and it was really interesting to see drawings before and after class, or before, at the beginning of the semester and the end of the semester. But it also, that drawing, it seems really simple, but it helps you understand what they're thinking about, especially if they explain their drawing. Another strategy I tried was pick a song that best exemplifies, what you think about, and then explain it. And it was really interesting to see how or why they were thinking the way they were. So for those of you who are struggling to go next steps, there we go.
It's backwards, but
I was just going to find the
I
link to
haven't-
that book.
yeah, I haven't. Have you read it, Arity?
I've read parts of it.
Okay.
Did you like it?
I did, yeah.
Okay. So making thinking visible, Ron, Richard, Mark Church, Karen Morrison, I'll try to get a link into the chat for you. But it talks about, I haven't dug into it even as much as you have, Arity, but it talks about thinking routines and obviously practices that you could kind of enculturate your students in, I think, to help a culture of visible thinking emerge.
The other one that I really like sort of on that front, just like little things that you can incorporate into your class is Small Teaching by John Lang. And that is just, it's like, I find that I often get super excited about things, but then it's too late to incorporate it into the semester. Like it's too big and I don't know where to start.
Yeah.
And that one is just lots of little things. Like here's a way that you can promote thinking with your students. Here's a way where you can get them to articulate or participate, or it's a lot of little things. So I like those two pieces.
Okay.
What was this? Oh, small teaching.
Small
If you
teaching.
could grab the Amazon link, Arity, and
Yeah.
toss that in the chat, that'd be great.
And the other thing that I was going to mention with what Sylvia was saying, I think are you still there?
Yep, we're here.
Yeah, we're still here.
I lost my video.
Is it on your toolbar down at the bottom?
No. It went away. Anyway, I'll figure that out. With the making thinking visible, I know what the research for physics is showing is that unless you can get students to articulate what they're actually thinking, they don't actually learn anything. So you can't get them to fix a misconception unless you've gotten them to articulate that misconception. And all of those pieces where we're trying to see what they're thinking, that really helps with that. Because otherwise they take in the new information and they go, oh yeah, that's what I always thought, but they don't actually think about it.
Yeah, they skip over the cognitive dissonance part.
Yeah.
So Jesse, to bring it to the poor librarian in the one-shot scenario where the students don't want ambiguity, they're not going to tolerate it. What have you found to help bridge that gap? Or do you just, because right now it's really hard not to do a library instruction session going, ta-da, here it is. Ta-da! Here, you know what I mean?
Right, which actually doesn't help, because just like Arity said, they think they imagine that they always knew that. So even if we're just doing a demo of how to work the library website, they're nodding and going, oh yeah, there's the button, and then they try to do it again later.
Can I ask how you experience student pushback? Because I know how I experience it as a instructor that deals with them every day over the course of the semester, but in terms of your one shot, it seems, and I'll relate a story here and then I want to hear what you have to say. So I sent my students to a library workshop this semester, and I had talked a little bit with the librarian ahead of time, and I was out of town, so this was the second of a sequence.
Okay.
And so he sent them on a scavenger hunt throughout the library to find a variety of sources that were pertinent to their research projects, and then bring them back to the class, the classroom and talk about it. And it turned out that the structure that he had set up was actually incorrect, and so my students basically went on a wild goose chase all over the library, and they weren't able to find what they were looking for, and he felt awful about it.
Yeah.
But and I was kind of like, oh, you know what, okay, that's fine. But it was really interesting talking to the students afterwards, because that whole experience was full of ambiguity and mess and inconsistency, but they didn't feel that way so much.
Okay.
Like, I mean, they felt that was the way it was, but they were also able to have a really strong discussion about it.
Okay.
And so I'm curious then, from the librarian perspective, how you've experienced that pushback.
Yeah, I think building in some carefully supported failure is kind of important. So that's exactly what your students experienced, is their wild goose chase wasn't necessarily immediately successful. And then they were able to, it sounds like someone facilitated some reflection
Yeah, I think
about why it wasn't successful, and hopefully what they might, some tips about what they might do, how they would reflect and adjust their process. So that's really nice because they can see that it is messy, but hopefully still walk away with some strategies to manage their own mess.
It's
So your
interesting.
first, oh, go ahead, Kristen.
But it is interesting. Like I'll give a concrete example, but I don't want you to lose your train of thought there, Jesse, because
No, it's okay.
tremendously helpful. But I used to do, and I don't do it anymore. But if I had asked a group to, figure something out and then go to the front of the room and demonstrate it, and so then they would do a demonstration, and I would say, "Oh, that's really great." And like, this is how I would tweak it, or this is a power use. Like I would try to kind of upsell it, but the students were pretty defensive. Like I was criticizing what they had done. And I think it's because there's not that rapport there.
Yeah.
That's what I imagine, right? I haven't built a rapport all semester. So I was really taken aback because, I wasn't saying you're doing this wrong, but that's how they took it,
So I do a very similar thing for our English 101s. And what I do is, while they're working in groups, I make sure I visit each group, and I kind of ask them ahead of time the kinds of questions I might ask them if they were just presenting up front, so they feel a little bit more prepared. I tell them that asking the librarian is never cheating, and so basically I'm kind of connecting with each group ahead of time, and I'm setting them up for success once they get to the front. It doesn't always produce what I'm hoping it'll produce. Sometimes they just get up and they jump through the hoops, and that's okay. But I think making sure you get very personable with every group before they present has helped that process for me.
Okay.
I also give them the criteria that they have to measure themselves against beforehand. So we spend about 20 minutes talking about how to evaluate sources first. And so by the time they have to present how they're searching and what they're finding, they already know I'm going to ask them who wrote it, what evidence did they use to justify if it's credible. And so they get the criteria, and then I've already asked their group to articulate that before they even get up to the front. So that has helped too. And I do some storytelling at the beginning to help them understand either the impact of misinformation or information like unliteracy. Is that even a word? Or to just upset their misconceptions about information. So when I talk about accountability systems, I share the story of Jason Blair and how he was working for the New York Times, and he just started making up stories. And yes, they got through because he was a really good writer, and he was able to kind of anticipate what could get through the system. But when he was found out, he was fired, but also the senior editor of the New York Times was forced to resign. So did misinformation get through? Yes. But were there consequences for false information, and was there a system in place that was supposed to be checking it? So those are the kinds of things I ask them to look for in accountability systems. Not it's totally trustworthy all the time, because that's not possible. So I kind of tell a few stories as I'm bringing up those criteria for reliability that hopefully help them understand the nuance. and just to look a little bit deeper. I don't know if that helps.
One of the things I tried this semester, and I'm laughing because right before I got on here, I was looking at some grad students ask questions like, is it okay if we revise our literature search as we find out new information? And it's like, yes, yes, we have said yes before. But I tried, as per Jesse and the Framework for Information Literacy, that research or even looking up journal articles is a conversation. So if I'm going to have a conversation, I might say something like, I need to figure out, what the research is about XYZ, and I go look up a journal article and I read it, I'm like, that author is having a conversation with you. They're not sitting across the table talking to you, but through their words, they're talking to you. And now they're expecting you to respond to that. Do you need more information from somebody else? Do you need to go dig deeper? Do you have questions about what they're writing? So I'm like, TED videos are talking to you. The journal articles are talking to you. Research is a conversation, and you're talking to people who are communicating with you via all these other medium, and you need to figure out, are they credible? So we go into looking at credible sources and all of that. But I've tried to give them this idea. It goes back to the idea that, maybe they're offended that you have suggested other sources, but well, you would just cut somebody off and say, thanks, that's what I need, I'm done with you. You want to continue the conversation. So how will you do that? And I don't know how well it works. I need to explore that a bit more, but I've been trying to tell them, I get that you want to jump through the hoop and go find 4 journal articles, but I'm hoping you have a conversation with literature.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, and acknowledging that the literature is, it's not just having a conversation with you. So what I often tell students is that they're entering the middle of a conversation and they need to figure out where they're at, where the conversation is at before they jump in. So acknowledging that this journal article, this author is actually having a conversation with other people in the field. And to try to measure where that conversation is at using the references and using the tool in, Google Scholar that lets you cite forward, figure out the citations going forward. Yeah. Arity, did that answer your question about student engagement? I'm not sure.
I think it did a little bit, just that pushback that you were experiencing in your workshop.
Yeah.
One thing that sort of strikes me is this idea of modeling, like how we conduct ourselves is kind of giving us an example of how we'd like our students to do that. And I'm wondering if you could model a presentation and then make it intentionally incomplete. And so then you're getting a dialogue with your students to critique what you're doing so that when you turn around and do that for them, it's a piece that they're comfortable with, like they've had the opportunity to test it out from the audience perspective and then to try it from the presenter perspective. I don't know if that's something that you could do or would be interested in doing.
Yeah, no, it's a creative idea. I'll chew on that for a while.
Yeah, thanks, Arity.
I would say also, I hope you'll have the library interaction again. I know for me, sometimes I'll put in a whole bunch of work for something and then want the opportunity. Okay, yeah, we've been through this once. Let's see how it can go another time. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm actually really excited to work with the librarian on our campus, Brad G. Again, because this is the first semester that I've worked with him. I've worked with other people on our campus before, but Brad seems really open to coming up with specific activities for my class and tailoring that. And so, yeah, I really loved the idea of this sort of scavenger hunt through the library. and part of it worked out really well in that they were doing space-related things, and we have some alumni that have been to the space station. So we have some things in our archives that have been to the space station. And one of the successful things was they had to go get the archivist and one of these items and bring it back and share it to the class. And that one worked really well. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to just show students like this huge range of sources that we have available. So yeah, I fully intend to work with them again on it.
Cool.
Can I ask a question about the RSD and kind of our mapping project here?
Yeah.
As I'm thinking about these things and looking at Dustin's piece for our physics classes, we're in pretty much the same position where a lot of it, especially in our introductory classes, or particularly in the introductory ones, is that kind of that level 1 piece. And I too struggle with the assessment because we do a lot of activities that have very little in the way of formal assessment. So generally just points for completing it because it's that low stakes kind of way to be involved.
Mm-hmm.
But I do a lot of informal assessment. So conversations with the students where I'm checking in. Is that, like, should we be including that in our RSD as part of what we're doing, or should this really just be a formal assessment piece?
No, any sort of assessment can be included, especially now that you're maybe reflecting back and saying, oh, that's how I check in with them about that. And then just being intentional about it, you know, decide which facets, which learning objectives you would rather assess that way. And just note that in kind of in your plan so you know it's not getting lost.
Okay. So
you know, and make sure you're looking for the things that you are explicitly asking of them. So if you're asking them to, sometimes we ask them to push the boundary a little bit to see if we can get them to make a leap, if that makes sense, up the scale of autonomy or critical thinking, and that's okay. But obviously we want the assessment generally to match what we're explicitly asking the students to perform at, and that to match where we want them to be performing at. Otherwise, that assessment, so the asking can be an assessment that makes it visible how they're thinking about something, but it also can be the teaching tool to move them up the scale. So it can serve as both. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Definitely. Doesn't have to be formal.
Other questions?
Did you demonstrate going through this particular worksheet at the end of last session by any chance?
No, we just posted it
Okay.
in here as Sylvia's example.
Oh,
so
okay.
Sylvia
So
actually constructed this worksheet, and it really reflects how she thinks through her mapping process. You may decide that this is not how you think through. And in fact, I would say as the librarian, I would probably approach it a little differently. And I haven't constructed an example from my perspective. So it's just really one way of using the RSD to make visible to yourself what you're asking versus what they're doing.
I found Dustin's run through really beneficial though. Very good job.
Yeah, me too, actually. I always learn something new because everybody just captures it and molds it a little bit differently. That might be what I like most about the RSD.
It's good to know that I wasn't, that far out in left field that at least has traction with everybody.
No, you learned something through the process about how you're
Definitely.
operating, and that's the whole point. So.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll definitely go back and do this and take a stab at it.
Okay. Yeah. Arity, did you take a stab at it? Are you thinking about moving forward?
I sort of loosely took a stab at it. I didn't formalize anything.
That's okay. Do you want to talk about it, or do you want to think about it a little bit more before you share?
I find myself, instead of thinking about what I'm doing in my class, I am thinking more and more about our whole program.
Yeah.
And in part, that's because we're right in the middle of this program assessment of the
Yeah.
assessment and all of these other things, right?
Mhm.
And we're trying to have this conversation about what research skills are our students coming out with. And I just keep thinking, like, I really want to just take all of this and sit down with my whole department and say,
Mhm.
at what point, you know, in each of our classes, where do we expect the students to be and where are they ending up at the end?
Sure.
And I think for me right now, it's certainly in our 100 level classes, we're really in that, like Dustin is, that prescribed piece, but often I think we're assessing a little bit higher up.
Okay.
And I think kind of in the same way that Dustin is, like, expecting them to be able to look at data and say, that's not good, what went wrong? And in some ways, I find that I do a lot of that informally, where I'll be talking to a group and I'll be like, okay, what do you think of your data? So I don't have any formal questions for that, and I think I'd like to incorporate some formal questions for that.
Okay.
Yeah, like Ari was saying, it's a lot of that is like as I'm walking around and they're doing the labs, sometimes they'll say this doesn't quite look right, and then we can have a conversation about that. But sometimes they're just going along full speed ahead, and it's nonsense that they're working with, and I have to try to scale it back and ask them. It's like, okay, have you thought about this? Like, is this what you're expecting? And yeah, just get them to stop and think before going ahead. So yeah, it changes the whole structure of how we do labs, getting them to answer questions during instead of after.
Mm-hmm. You may want to, so when you first introduced that as your kind of deviation and evaluation, this idea of being able to recognize when something isn't going right, that's actually a really advanced expert skill.
Absolutely, yeah.
That takes a lot of nuance. So I wonder if you might have some sort of learning activity where they're presented with lots of data sets along the continuum of good and bad, and maybe they'll go on a little fault finding hunt. It would have to be pretty well, it would have to be pretty clean examples, so that only maybe like one or two things would be wrong with it, or it would be like wrong from only one perspective. I don't know what your data looks like, but definitely work from like having to recognize one single obvious thing up to like, this is like a scenario way of teaching, right? Up to like having to analyze a data set with multiple issues from multiple perspectives. But that may be helpful if you want to train them to see data in that way. And as an information literacy person, data literacy is super important because of how science and how science and public knowledge interacts right now, and in health and lots of areas. So, and just one of my passion points is students understanding that research is a human process and it's fallible, and it totally depends on the premises and the questions that are asked in the beginning, what is going to be seen at the end, and does it match the conclusions. So I love that thought of going into looking at data and just starting to understand that statistical numbers aren't always everything they say they are. I don't know if that relates at all to what you're doing, and I'm at a freshman level, obviously that's, they're just trying to get your equipment down in some ways, but to me that would be like the ultimate goal.
I really like that idea of a whole spectrum, and we do a little bit of that with this, giving them a wrong answer and trying to ask them to figure out what happened. But I like the idea of having a whole series where they get progressively more complex.
Arity, I want to return to something you were talking about earlier. You said it'd be interesting. You find yourself walking around and looking at the whole program.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to share this with you, not at all suggesting it's what you should do, but it's an option. one of the nice things about the RSD framework is that it's scalable. So you can look at it from a lesson point of view, from a course point of view, from a program point of view.
Mm.
And I know that Eau Claire actually started taking the RSD framework. They have not taken it down to the lesson or class level. They had their department map out where their courses were on the RSD framework. And they evaluated programs. And one of the things I did for one of our programs is I took the RSD framework and overlaid a clear acetate overhead projector sheet left over, and started class by class, what are the major assignments and which of the RSD facets are you targeting and what level? So here was class 1 and their acetate sheet, here's class 2 and their acetate sheet,
Oh, yeah.
and here's class 3. And what really started to happen was, nobody had looked at or sat down as a team to vertically or horizontally align courses. And you could start to see how the same 3 facets were being addressed in the same classes over time at the same level. Some were totally ignored, and all of the while the people are complaining about how their students don't come out with the problem solving or critical thinking skills they have. And you start to look at this and you can really see where the holes in your program are. So I know that you said that you would like to take that to the program. It's possible to, just an FYI, it's possible to do, but it takes a team.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because then the second layer to that is analyzing your assessments and making sure that you have some inner, relator reliability. That when you say you're assessing at level 1 in this way, you're all actually assessing that similarly.
Mhm.
Establishing that common language takes a long time.
Yeah.
But my eyes glitter a little bit when you say this is where you want to dive, because that's, as a librarian who consults, that's always been kind of, I would love to see information literacy, scaffolded up a program.
Yeah.
Instead of kind of accidentally, haphazardly hoped for.
And I know that we've wanted and we talk about doing this and we do it to a certain extent, but I think that there are big holes in what we're doing. So figuring out how to bring that up with everybody.
That's because it's a full-time job, as no one is paying you a course release to do that kind of work.
No.
So it's understandable.
Yeah.
But let us know if we can give you some tools or try to support you in that.
I think maybe what I'll start with is just sharing the RSD framework with the department and asking everybody to look at it and contemplate on it. And then maybe next semester I'll ask for a meeting for us to start thinking about it as a whole.
Okay.
You definitely need to get buy-in. It isn't going to work if you don't have buy-in from your colleagues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I will say from experience that just showing people the RSD, maybe 30% will have the immediate, oh, aha, that's useful. And many more will say, that's pretty. I don't know how to use that. And so if there are any of the activities that Sylvia and I have used to help you guys wrestle with the language in it and apply it, feel free to steal them.
Okay.
All of them.
And there's some other strategies. John Wilson shared a boatload of them with me, so there's other strategies we can maybe try to come up with as well that you might use.
Okay.
The idea is to get it to them quickly. Like you've got about maybe 50 minutes. We generally find 50 minutes to an hour. People will devote like an hour-long meeting to this. And then they need to go wrestle and play with it. And they probably won't get it until they actually do stuff with it.
Yeah. And my concern is right now I think I could probably get about 10 minutes to introduce this as an idea.
Yeah.
Right. And then have to come back to it later for a bigger buy-in.
Yeah.
So maybe it's pretty is good enough at that point.
Any other thoughts that any of you have, or any needs or supports Jessie and I can get for you?
Well, thanks
Yeah.
for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you. This is always, I always feel like I'm struggling to find the time for it, but it's always exceptionally beneficial to me to sit down and have these conversations. I really appreciate it.
Good.
Yeah, ditto. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
try not to waste your time.
No, not a waste at all.
No, this is really helping me ask questions that I didn't know needed to be asked that, yeah, are part of bigger questions I was already asking without me knowing about it. So this is great.
All right. Well, have a great rest of the day and rest of the week. And just give us an email if you need anything moving forward.
Okay.
Sounds
Yep.
good.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a good day,
Yeah.
everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.